The rain poured relentlessly on the runway as Ethan Cole boarded the plane, drenched to the bone, clutching the contract that could change his future. But before he could even fasten his seatbelt, a disdainful glance from the flight attendant sealed the fate of this flight. No explanation, no ticket check, just a cold command. Get off. You don't belong in first class. And just like that, years of hard work, dreams, and sacrifices were thrown to the floor, as if he were invisible. Have you ever felt stripped of your dignity simply because of your appearance? This story will choke you up, but more importantly, it will show you that the most powerful revenge isn't anger. It's letting success speak for you. The sky was a dull gray, like a thick blanket draped over the entire Liberty International Airport that morning. The wind howled, sweeping across the large glass windows, causing them to rattle as if ringing alarm bells. Puddles of dark water pooled on the concrete floor, reflecting the dim glow of fluorescent lights, making the terminal feel as though it were being swallowed by something dark and invisible. The intercom crackled with a distorted announcement. Apex Flight 815 to Denver is currently undergoing security checks. Passengers, please remain in your positions. In the first-class waiting area, amid expensive suits and high-end perfumes, sat a lone black man by the window, Ethan Cole. His suit was unflashy, devoid of any ostentatious brand logos, just a light gray fabric, perfectly pressed, with the collar slightly worn as if it had endured countless tense presentations. Ethan's fingers tightened around the envelope as he tried to steady his breath. The cold, muted air around him seemed to press in, intensifying the weight of the moment. He was so close to everything he had worked for, yet for a fleeting second, he felt small and insignificant amidst the soft murmurs of disdain. The truth was, he had grown used to this, to the glances, to the whispers, to the unspoken judgment that often followed him, no matter how far he had come or how much he had achieved. The loud hum of the fluorescent lights above only made the silence deeper. He couldn't help but wonder how many others sitting in the lounge, dressed in designer labels and dripping with privilege, had any idea of the struggle he had faced to reach this point. To them, he was just another nameless figure, blending into the background of a space meant for the elite. But to him, this moment meant everything. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every setback, all of it had led him here. As the time dragged on, the atmosphere in the lounge grew heavier. More eyes began to turn in his direction, some with curiosity, others with subtle disdain. A young man in a tailored suit, who had been pacing back and forth earlier, now stood still, staring directly at Ethan. The man's gaze was sharp, filled with the kind of skepticism that Ethan had learned to read all too well. He could almost hear the judgment forming behind those eyes. What's he doing here? He doesn't belong. Ethan's grip on the envelope tightened again, his knuckles white. The letter inside was his future, the culmination of years of hard work, of walking a fine line between failure and success. But no matter what this deal would bring, no matter the power it would give him, there was always that nagging feeling of being seen as an outsider in spaces that were never meant for him. Then a voice broke through the tension. The announcement that Apex Flight 815 was now ready for boarding. Ethan didn't flinch. He knew this moment would come. His heart raced, but he didn't allow it to show. He stood up slowly, carefully placing the envelope into his jacket pocket. The eyes of the room followed him as he moved toward the boarding gate, their gazes sharp, full of silent assumptions. As he approached the gate, the flight attendant at the counter, a young woman with sharp features and a tightly clipped hairstyle, glanced up. Her eyes flickered over his attire, plain, unassuming, before she looked down at her computer screen. There was a pause, a moment of hesitation, before she straightened up. "First-class boarding, sir?" she asked, her tone polite, but with an undertone of condescension that Ethan could feel. He nodded, handing her his boarding pass with quiet confidence. The attendant scanned it, her eyes briefly scanning him before her lips pressed together in a tight, almost imperceptible frown. She handed the pass back to him without a word, her fingers brushing his for a second too long. Ethan walked past the gate, his eyes set ahead, every step echoing through the sterile silence of the terminal. He could almost feel the weight of the stairs on his back, the judgment hanging in the air like a thick fog. As he made his way down the jet bridge, he couldn't help but wonder, is this what success truly feels like? Or is this just another battle in a war that will never end? In the silence of the jet bridge, With the hum of the plane engines growing louder in his ears, Ethan took a deep breath and adjusted his jacket. He had come this far, and nothing, not even the subtle dismissals of those who thought they were better than him, would stop him now. The future he had fought for was just beyond that door. The first-class cabin door closed behind Ethan with a soft but chilling click. He stepped into the quiet, luxurious space where the seats were upholstered in premium leather and the gentle yellow light bathed the velvet curtains, carefully drawn to ensure no light disturbed the passenger. The atmosphere here was still, yet not warm. It felt empty and cold. Ethan took his seat in 2A, his dark gray suit still damp from the relentless rain outside. He let out a soft breath, his eyes fluttering shut briefly as he tried to hold on to the fleeting peace before the most important journey of his life began. In his hands, the cream-colored envelope was held tightly against his chest, an investment contract worth over $32 million, signed earlier that morning in Boston. It was the result of 8 years of struggle, blood, and tears, from a cheap motel room to the day he could sit in first class and close a historic deal. That envelope contained more than just money. It held his life, his honor, and the dream of an entire impoverished community he had grown up with. But that dream was starting to get drenched. A drop of rain from his hair slid down his finger, smudging the ink where the final signature had been. Ethan quickly wiped it away, trying to flatten the paper, but before he could tuck it into his briefcase, the cold click of high heels echoed down the aisle. Ethan looked up. Ms. Avery, the head flight attendant for first class, was approaching, her pale face, tightly tied blonde hair, and lips pressed into a thin, emotionless line. No greeting, no smile. Her eyes scanned Ethan as if he were a stain on the luxury carpet. "You're in the wrong seat." Her voice rang out like the hammer of a judge, cold and unyielding. Ethan flinched slightly. He glanced down at the ticket still placed on the fold-out table in front of him. It clearly read, "Ethan Cole, first class, seat 2A. Excuse me, but I think I already told you. You're in the wrong seat. This is for priority passengers." Her tone wasn't a question, and she didn't bother to check his ticket. Ethan gently extended it, his hands shaking from the unexpected insult, but Avery didn't even glance at it, tilting her head arrogantly. "You should return to economy before I have to call someone to remove you." Ethan froze. The air around him suddenly felt thick. The silver-haired man behind him cleared his throat. A woman in expensive jewelry discreetly snapped a photo. Cold, disdainful, judgmental glances started to pour in. The atmosphere grew toxic. No one defended him. No one said, "Let's check the ticket first." No one asked who Ethan was because, to them, a black man in a wet suit sitting in first class was clearly in the wrong. His hands still gripped the envelope. It was starting to soften from the rain and sweat. The dream was melting right where he sat. And up ahead, the cockpit door cracked open slightly. A pair of eyes watched every unfolding moment. Something was about to happen, but before it did, Ethan would have to swallow this humiliation right in the place that was supposed to symbolize his success. Each word from Ms. Avery was like a cold slap to Ethan's face. There was no respect, no fairness, just provocation and contempt. "I told you, you're in the wrong seat. If you don't leave now, I'll call security." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the still air like a knife. Avery stood there, her posture regal and full of authority, as though she had nothing to prove and no need to know who Ethan was. From the look in her eyes, he was nothing more than an insect under her heel, an existence unworthy of attention. Ethan tightened his grip. The envelope was still clutched in his palm, the weight of the shame pressing against him. It wasn't just the humiliation of being asked to leave first class. It was the cruel indifference in the way Avery saw him, as if he didn't even exist. That feeling surged inside him, a force pushing him down into the depths of invisibility. The passengers around him began to stare strange, prejudice-filled glares. They were silent, but it wasn't the silence of sympathy or agreement. It was a silence laced with complicity. A woman behind him smirked, a malicious grin, as though she had just witnessed prey being caught. Ethan turned slightly, and for a brief moment, his gaze met that of an elderly white man seated ahead of him. He gave a subtle nod, as if acknowledging the rightness of Avery's actions. The chilling sense of complicity from those around him made the air feel even more suffocating. Ms. Avery's voice came again, but this time it was a brazen declaration. "If you were a first-class passenger, you wouldn't be worrying about this. But since you're in the wrong seat, don't make me have to call security." Her words confirmed what Ethan had feared, that no matter the first-class ticket in his hand, no matter the multi-million-dollar contract he had fought for, he was still an outsider. All it took was one moment of his skin being a different shade to make everything he had achieved meaningless. It was all just a joke. No one stood up to defend him. No one offered a word of comfort. The passengers around him continued to turn away, lost in their phones or pretending to sleep, as if they couldn't see the blatant violation happening right before them. The feeling of being forgotten, of being treated as if he didn't exist, flooded Ethan once again. He was like a ghost in a place he had once dreamed of entering. The space around him seemed to shrink, suffocating him more than ever. The smell of damp rain from outside acted as a silent warning. The hum of the plane's engines seemed distant, muffled, as if it were being smothered by the quiet crowd. Ethan suddenly felt the air leave his lungs, as if he were bound by the cold, sterile atmosphere. No one was stepping forward to protect him, and the sensation was like a ticking time bomb, with each passing moment making him feel smaller and more insignificant. But there was something inside Ethan that refused to break. Even if he were thrown out of first class, he still held an immeasurable power in his hands, the contract he had fought his entire life to obtain. Ethan stepped out of the first-class cabin, each step ringing on the airplane's floor like a brutal slap to his self-respect. With every step, he felt the pain sink deeper into his mind, the humiliation rising in every cell of his body. Despite presenting his first-class ticket, that ticket, along with all the value and effort he had invested in obtaining it, seemed worthless in the eyes of those around him. Their gazes remained unchanged, full of contempt, judgment, as if he were some strange outsider unworthy of being there. The atmosphere on the plane grew suffocating, and with every step, Ethan felt as though another massive door was slamming shut. Not just the rejection from those around him, but all the efforts he had fought for over the years, all the dreams, all the sacrifices seemed to vanish in an instant, all because of a different skin color. With every step, he felt more acutely the suffocating grip of discrimination he never wanted to face. He didn't just feel discriminated against by strangers, but by the very passengers on this flight. Their stares, cold and scrutinizing, made him feel smaller, like an invisible man. Those looks didn't just hurt. They pushed him deeper into the abyss of invisibility. In that moment, Ethan wasn't a successful man, a businessman with a multi-million-dollar contract. He was just a black man sitting in first class, and to them, that was an injustice. At that moment, a passenger near the entrance of economy class turned around, his gaze sweeping over Ethan with impatience, showing no effort to hide the disdain in his eyes. Who is this guy? A delivery man. Ethan clearly heard every word, even though the man didn't try to speak quietly. Such a simple statement, yet it pierced through him like a sharp knife. Ethan tried not to let it bother him, but he couldn't ignore the insult. The man's racism wasn't just in his words, but in the way his eyes assessed him, as if he wasn't worthy to be there simply because he was wearing a plain shirt, not an expensive suit, not the perfect attire of a successful businessman. He was wearing simple clothes, nothing flashy, but none of the passengers around him understood that he was a successful man holding a contract worth millions, someone who had fought his whole life to rise above adversity. They didn't care about what he had done, what he had overcome. They only judged him by his appearance, by his skin color, and assumed he didn't belong in first class. When Ethan entered the economy cabin, a mocking laugh echoed behind him. The sound was one of disdain, as though he didn't deserve to be on this flight, as if he didn't deserve to sit anywhere on this plane. The cramped seats, starkly different from the luxurious first class, now became a symbol of the discrimination he had to endure. It wasn't just a difference in seating, it was a difference in people, in preconceived notions, in invisible class divides. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. The indescribable pain almost suffocated him. Even though he had worked so hard to prove himself, society still wouldn't give him a chance. The looks, the words, the judgments had shut the door tight within him. He couldn't escape the feeling of being forgotten, of being pushed aside, no matter how hard he tried. That shame, that silent guilt, overwhelmed him like an invisible wave. But he knew he couldn't let himself be defeated. No matter what, he understood that to change this, he would have to fight, not just with the world outside, but with himself, with the limits society had placed on him. He would never allow this discrimination to win. Ethan sat down in the cramped seat in economy class, surrounded by cold faces and the heavy silence that filled the space. He held his phone in his hands, his fingers gliding across the screen, but everything around him seemed to blur. The hum of the airplane, the sighs of the passengers, all were fragmented sounds that couldn't soothe the offense still digging into his mind. His gaze turned toward the window, staring out at the sky, but all he saw was a dull gray expanse, the rain falling like invisible tears. The rain outside seemed to mirror the pain within him, each drop heavy with thoughts he couldn't escape, the relentless injustice he was forced to endure. Once again, he felt like an outsider, not someone whom those around him allowed to exist in their world. He felt each wave of exhaustion, of disappointment, sweeping across his soul. Ethan looked down at his phone, rereading the message he had just sent to his assistant. "They think I'm not worthy." Again, a simple sentence, but filled with so much pain. He pressed send, but the moment he hit the button, he felt as if he had just exhaled a sigh that no one could hear. A perfect silence with no one to share it with. His assistant wouldn't understand what he was going through, and he couldn't tell anyone about this feeling of hurt. He glanced down at the envelope containing the multi-million-dollar contract he had clutched tightly during the flight. He had once hoped so much for this meeting, this promising deal with a major partner. But now, looking at it, all he felt was that the contract was nothing but ashes in his hands. That contract, which could change his life, no longer brought him joy. He realized something. Money couldn't wash away this discrimination. People still saw him as just a man of color, unworthy, even though he held what they only dreamed of. All his efforts seemed meaningless in a world that refused to see him with a fair eye. The pain washed over him, and for the first time, Ethan wondered if he had been wrong to place so much hope in a world he could never truly belong to. He closed the phone, his hand lifting to his forehead, feeling empty inside. This flight would be no different than one that would never reach its destination. And while others could live in peace, he remained trapped behind the invisible walls of discrimination. Ethan sat there, his tired eyes still locked on the phone in his hand. His heart felt heavy with a mixture of helplessness and disappointment that seemed to weigh him down. The rain outside the airport was relentless, its sharp patter against the window creating an almost ominous soundtrack to his turbulent thoughts. It felt as though the storm outside was a reflection of the chaos inside him, a relentless downpour that washed away any sense of hope he had left. The past few hours felt like they had been lived in a different world, a world where the usual rules of fairness and respect no longer applied, and escape felt impossible. As the suffocating tension began to crawl deeper into his chest, threatening to drown him in its weight, Ethan's phone suddenly buzzed. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. He jumped, startled by the unexpected notification. A new message appeared on the screen. It was from Sarah Chun, his assistant. Sarah was not just a colleague. She had been with Ethan through thick and thin, from the early days when he had nothing but ambition and a vision, to the countless challenges he had faced on his path to success. Sarah had always been by his side. She knew him better than most, and he knew he could rely on her in the most trying of times. But this message wasn't about work or the usual updates. It wasn't another task to be checked off the list or a routine follow-up. This time, Sarah had something far more significant to say. Ethan opened the message, his fingers trembling slightly as he read her words. The message was short but powerful. "I've informed the chairman. He's contacting me now." The chairman, an old friend, a trusted ally, and a man who had witnessed Ethan's rise from humble beginnings to the powerful position he held today, was the only person in the entire company who could help him now. This man knew Ethan's capabilities and influence. They had been through many ups and downs together, financial crises, major decisions, and even some personal struggles. But this situation was different. It had come out of nowhere, and the timing was strange. They hadn't spoken in months, and Ethan wasn't sure what to expect. Would the chairman truly understand the depth of the situation? Would he see that this was not just a simple mistake, but part of a much deeper issue of discrimination that Ethan was facing? Or was this just a formal gesture, a call to acknowledge the issue without any real intent to address it? Before Ethan could dwell too much on these questions, his phone buzzed again. It was a direct call from the chairman. His heart skipped a beat. He quickly hit the green button, his pulse racing. It felt like the world had narrowed down to this one moment, the call that could change everything. "Ethan, The chairman's voice came through the phone, familiar and warm, but there was an underlying tension in it that Ethan could hear. The weight of the situation was evident even in those first few words. "Chairman," Ethan replied, trying to steady his breath, though it felt like his chest was tightening with each passing second. He didn't want to appear weak, but inside, he was a storm of emotions. "I hear there was an issue on the flight." The chairman's tone was direct, as if he already knew what had happened. Ethan couldn't tell if this was due to the report from Sarah or if the chairman was simply responding to the unfolding scandal. Either way, the question was loaded, and Ethan could feel the eyes of the world on him, even through the phone. "Yeah, you know, I'm on this flight, and I was just kicked down to economy," Ethan said, his voice laced with frustration and an indescribable sadness. "Not because I didn't have a first-class ticket, but because of my skin color." The words felt heavy, as if each one carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken injustices. There was a moment of silence from the other end of the line. Ethan could almost hear the chairman's deep breath, and then the response came, laced with both authority and concern. "This cannot be left like this. I'll speak with the CEO and the flight manager immediately." The chairman's words gave Ethan a flicker of hope that this situation, this deep-rooted injustice, would not be allowed to slide. For the first time since the incident, he felt a glimmer of belief that something might actually change. But before Ethan could continue speaking, the chairman cut in, his voice firm and resolute. "Ethan, I know you might think this call won't change anything, but I promise you, I will do everything I can. And this time, I won't let this kind of discrimination continue." The chairman paused, and then added with even more conviction, "I'll help you, my old friend. You deserve the best seat on this flight." For the first time since the incident, Ethan felt a sense of reassurance. The chairman's words, the way he spoke, made it clear that he wasn't just offering empty promises. Ethan could feel the sincerity in his tone. This wasn't just about Ethan's fight. It was about standing up to something much larger, much more systemic. The call ended shortly after, but the silence that followed lingered. Ethan sat there, eyes glued to his phone screen, his mind swirling with mixed thoughts. What would the chairman really do to fix this? Would this actually lead to a lasting change, or would it just be another empty gesture? The uncertainty hung in the air, but there was a sense of purpose now, a sense that things were moving, even if slowly. The rain outside continued to pour, but it no longer felt like an unstoppable, oppressive force. It felt like a signal, a sign that change had already begun with this secret call. It was as if the storm outside was finally starting to ease, just as Ethan's own storm of emotions began to settle. But even with this moment of hope, Ethan couldn't shake the question that lingered in his mind. Would this change come in time? Could it truly ease the deep pain he was feeling? Or was it just the beginning of a much longer fight? The uncertainty was still there, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan knew he had someone in his corner, someone powerful enough to help him fight for what was right. In the tense silence of the airplane cabin, everything suddenly seemed to slow down. The weight of the situation hung in the air, and the stillness was palpable. The passengers, once immersed in their own world, now sat motionless, too stunned by the events that had just unfolded to speak. The air around Ethan felt like it was frozen, and the faint glow of the airplane's overhead lights only seemed to deepen the heaviness in the room. No one dared to move, not even those who had earlier exchanged mocking smiles at his expense. Their expressions had now shifted into something akin to apprehension, as if they could feel the mounting tension. They understood that this fragile silence couldn't last long. Something was bound to break it. Just as Ethan braced himself for what was to come next, a soft chime echoed through the cabin, piercing the thick silence. He didn't bother to look up, but the moment he heard the voice of the flight attendant from the front, he knew the situation wasn't over. "Ms. Avery, report to the cockpit immediately. The CEO is requesting a status update." Her voice was stern, commanding, and unmistakable. Avery, still reeling from the shock of the past few moments, hesitated for a fraction of a second before standing up. Her legs wavered slightly, as if the weight of the situation was physically overwhelming her. She straightened herself, trying desperately to maintain the appearance of calm professionalism. But internally, her thoughts were chaotic. She had just made an error so severe, so unforgivable. Would there be repercussions for what she had done? And why had things escalated so quickly, spiraling out of control? As she made her way to the cockpit, The usual calm and collected atmosphere inside seemed entirely unaffected by the tension. The pilots were absorbed in their duties, their movements smooth and composed. But the moment Avery entered, the air inside the cockpit shifted drastically. Both the captain and the first officer turned to face her, their expressions immediately changing. "What happened, Avery?" The captain's voice was steady, but there was an edge of concern in his tone. He was a man of few words, his face often unreadable, but now there was a visible change in his demeanor. Avery stood still, a sense of uncontrollable unease flooding over her. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. Why did she feel like she was on the verge of something much worse? Why did everything seem upside down? In that moment, it was as if the world had turned against her, and she couldn't grasp what was happening. "Who is he?" the captain asked again, his voice tinged with disbelief as he looked at the information flashing across the cockpit screen. "You don't know who he is?" the first officer responded, his eyebrows raised in surprise, clearly shocked by the captain's question. Then something happened that Avery could never have anticipated. "He's a strategic shareholder of the airline," the captain said, his voice lowering now, sharp and full of tension. "He's someone we cannot touch. Not everyone has the privilege to treat him like that." The entire cockpit fell dead silent. The captain's words hit Avery like a thunderclap, stunning her into silence. She couldn't comprehend what she had just heard. The man she had humiliated, the one she had dismissed so easily, was a major stakeholder in the airline. He wasn't just any passenger. He was a man whose power and influence were far beyond what she could have imagined. How could it be him? In that instant, all the memories of the scornful looks, the derisive remarks, flooded back with crushing force. Her heart sank as the reality of her actions hit her like a tidal wave. The truth she had so casually ignored now felt like a weight too heavy to bear. Ethan, the man she had treated like an insignificant nobody, was a key figure in the company she worked for. How could she have been so blind? The uncomfortable silence in the cockpit stretched on, each second seeming to drag on endlessly. She could almost feel the eyes of both pilots on her, dissecting her every move, their judgment hanging in the air. The shame, the guilt, was unbearable. It was as if the entire world was watching her fail. "You'll need to explain yourself to upper management," the captain said again, his tone no longer calm or controlled. There was an underlying warning in his voice now, a sense of urgency. "This won't just be an apology. If you don't act quickly, the consequences will be more severe." Avery stood there, frozen, unable to speak. Her mind was racing, unable to process everything. What had she done? How could she have let this happen? She had treated Ethan as if he were insignificant, not even bothering to consider who he really was. And now she had no idea what was coming next. Her guilt and fear were suffocating, crashing into her mind like waves against a fragile shore. The weight of the situation was too much to bear. She could barely breathe, could hardly think, as the full scope of her mistake became glaringly clear. Her thoughts spiraled back to every moment she had spent with Ethan during the flight. The disdain in her voice, the coldness in her actions, all of it was now inexcusable. The worst part? She didn't know if she could undo what had been done. The damage was already done, and the consequences, no matter how much she tried to deny it, were now inevitable. For a moment, everything around her felt like it was closing in. The cockpit, once a space of professionalism and calm, now felt like a cage, a reflection of her own mental turmoil. She was trapped in her own actions, with nowhere to escape. As the captain and first officer continued to look at her, the weight of their judgment falling on her shoulders, Avery knew that this wasn't just a mistake. This was a turning point, and the outcome was something she could no longer control. As Avery returned from the cockpit, her face no longer held the confident composure she had when she left. Each step she took felt heavier, as though every stride lengthened within the cramped space of the plane. The feelings of fear and shame overwhelmed her, drowning out all other thoughts. No one spoke, but the shift in the flight attendant's demeanor was palpable to everyone in the cabin. The atmosphere in first class had changed completely. It no longer felt cold and indifferent. Instead, a sense of suffocating tension hung in the air, as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The passengers around her remained quiet, their expressions stiff, and even though their eyes remained averted, some of them couldn't help but glance at her. It was as though they all knew something was about to break, a moment of reckoning none of them could predict. Just moments later, the sound of the captain's voice echoed through the airplane's intercom, shattering the suffocating silence. "Ms. Avery, I regret to inform you that you are being immediately suspended." The captain's voice came through, firm yet cold. "You have violated both company policy and professional ethics." The words felt like a sharp blade piercing Avery's heart, as if the ground beneath her feet had been ripped away. She felt herself sinking into an endless void, one with no way out. No one spoke further, but the tension in the air was so thick that it was almost unbearable. Every passenger felt the gravity of the situation, but none dared to speak up or intervene. "Your badge will be revoked immediately." The captain's voice rang out once more, cutting through the heavy silence that had fallen over the cabin. Avery's eyes widened in shock, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. Her badge, the symbol of everything she had worked for over the years, was being stripped away right in front of her, and everyone around her was watching. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips, but no one could hear it. The loss and shame overwhelmed her. She had been wrong, so terribly wrong. Everything had spiraled beyond her control. And then, as if the heavens themselves had decided to shift the balance, Ethan was invited back to seat 2A, the very seat from which he had been removed. The change happened so quickly that the entire cabin went silent in disbelief. Those who had mocked him earlier now watched in silence. Unable to avoid the uncomfortable truth, they had mistreated him, and now they had to bear witness to their mistake. Ethan stood up, each step toward his seat filled with a strange mix of resentment and quiet anger. He didn't know what to do or how to feel, but the sense of being unacknowledged, the public humiliation, still lingered in his every cell. As he settled back into seat 2A, the gaze of the passengers around him seemed to avoid him. No one knew what to say. All eyes darted between each other in awkward silence, as if they were suddenly aware of the gravity of what had occurred. Yet, to Ethan, the silence felt like complicity. No one apologized. No one spoke out against what had happened. The silence spoke volumes in a way words never could. Avery, standing at the back of the cabin, remained frozen, her hands trembling as a deep sense of isolation filled her heart. She could hardly believe how far she had fallen, losing her job mid-flight in front of hundreds of eyes. The image of her badge being revoked was more than just a symbol of her professional failure. It felt like a final death knell to all the hope she had built in her career. It was a brutal reminder that sometimes one mistake can erase everything. Now, in the cabin, Ethan felt as though he was trapped in an invisible battle. It wasn't a fight with any one person. It was a fight against the loneliness and injustice that no one could truly understand unless they lived it. Only he knew how deeply this wound cut, how heavy it felt to live with this daily. And even though the world around him had momentarily shifted in his favor, he knew that the real battle wasn't over. Avery sat, her body stiff and her mind racing in the dimly lit cabin of the airplane. The cockpit's cold, sterile light fell on her face, casting long shadows that accentuated the deep lines etched across her forehead. The rage that burned in her eyes seemed to reflect the storm raging inside her. The weight of her humiliation was unbearable, and she couldn't escape it. She had failed. She had been humiliated in front of everyone. Every part of her screamed in frustration. She refused to accept this. This couldn't be the end. She would not let Ethan walk away unscathed, not after what had just happened. The silence around her felt suffocating. The passengers who had once been so judgmental now seemed to shrink back, unsure of what to make of her. They avoided her gaze, and for a moment, she imagined their disgust. But Avery wasn't concerned with their pity. She was consumed by a desire for revenge, a need to make Ethan pay. With trembling hands, Avery fumbled for her phone. Her fingers swiped across the screen with an urgency that matched the turmoil in her chest. She didn't need to look for long. Mark, her boyfriend, the one person who could help her in this moment of need, was at the top of the list. Mark was a cop, a man with power, connections, and, despite everything, a deep hatred for people of color. Avery didn't care about his racism now. She didn't care that he was part of the problem. She needed him. Mark could fix this. The phone rang, and when Mark answered, his voice was harsh, demanding, as though expecting trouble. "What's going on? What the hell are you doing?" His voice was full of frustration, as if he already knew something had gone wrong. But Avery wasn't intimidated. "I need you to help me, Mark," she said, her voice steady despite the fury bubbling inside her. "There's a man on this plane, Ethan Cole. He's black, and I made a mistake letting him sit in first class. But now I need to make him understand that he doesn't deserve what he has." Mark was silent for a moment, clearly processing her words. Avery waited, her pulse quickening. She didn't know how far Mark would go, but she knew he wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took. "Let me think about it," Mark finally replied, his voice calm but coldly methodical. "We need to make him understand his place. He won't get away with this." And with those words, a dark plan began to form. Mark, with his police connections, would do anything to take down someone who didn't belong. Avery could almost feel the blood rush to her face as Mark laid out his proposal. "We'll plant drugs in his bag after the flight." Mark's voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "Once we land, we'll make sure he gets arrested at the airport. He'll be thrown into a criminal investigation, and that will be the end of him. His life will be ruined." Avery felt a rush of dark satisfaction flood her veins as Mark spoke. The plan seemed so simple, yet so devastating. Ethan would pay, and she would be the one to bring him down. "Good. I'll do what you suggested. He will feel the consequences of his actions," Avery hissed, her voice full of venom. The phone call ended, and Avery sat there for a moment, her breath shallow. Her mind raced, every detail of the plan laid out in vivid clarity. She couldn't wait to see Ethan's world crumble. But more than that, she wanted him to suffer. She wanted him to feel the shame that she had endured, the same humiliation she had been forced to swallow. She looked up at Ethan, who was still sitting calmly in seat 2A. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about his posture that spoke volumes. He had no idea what was coming. The worst part, she realized, she was about to destroy his life, and it gave her a sick sense of satisfaction. Ethan didn't know it yet, but he was about to face a storm that he couldn't escape. Every moment of his confidence, every ounce of pride he had, would be shattered, and she would be the one to do it. Her revenge was inevitable. As the plane continued its journey through the skies, the passengers went about their business, blissfully unaware of the tension building up. But in Avery's heart, a ruthless plan was set in motion, one that would alter Ethan's life forever. What Avery didn't know was that this plan, as dark and satisfying as it seemed, was only the beginning. A war was about to unfold, and she had no idea just how far the consequences of her actions would reach. What she thought would be the final blow might, in fact, ignite something much bigger than she could control. As Ethan remained in his seat, unaware of the danger closing in, Avery's thoughts twisted further. She couldn't help but relish in the idea of seeing him suffer, but deep down, a nagging feeling tugged at her. Could it really end the way she imagined? Or was she about to start something she couldn't control? The storm had only just begun. Revenge, it seemed, had a way of coming back full circle. The chilling sensation from the cold concrete of the airport floor seeped into Ethan's shoes as he stepped out from the airplane beneath the gray, foreboding sky. The clouds gathered like a harbinger of something ominous. The tension still lingered in him, not because the flight had ended, but because of the humiliation he had just endured. Even though he had reclaimed his first-class seat, the eyes of the passengers still haunted him, their mocking glances, the silence that was complicit in his downfall. It felt like he could hardly breathe, weighed down by the cruelty he had faced. But everything shattered like broken glass when he hadn't even reached the end of the runway. A sudden voice cut through the air, so sharp and abrupt it seemed to rip through the silence. "Stop right there." Ethan spun around. The sound of high heels clicking sharply against the ground approached from behind. Police. A group of officers appeared out of nowhere, and among them, one man stood out. Mark, Avery's boyfriend. They walked toward him, their eyes cold, their presence intimidating, almost mocking. "You're under arrest for drug trafficking. Please cooperate." A tall, burly officer spoke with a voice that was sharp as a knife. Ethan froze, unable to believe what was happening. His body stiffened as if he had just been drenched in ice-cold water. Everything around him spun, and the shock hit him like a tidal wave. This was beyond humiliation. It was something else entirely, something that tore at the very core of his being. Drug trafficking? Ethan stammered, his eyes darting around, looking for any help. But no one stepped forward. No one said a word. The airport seemed completely silent. The eyes of the passengers still fixed on him, and those gazes, they weren't sympathetic. They were full of disdain. The pain surged in his chest, constricting around his heart. He wanted to resist, to scream out, to tell them that this wasn't true. But his hands were bound behind his back, the cold metal of the handcuffs digging into his wrists, symbolizing his helplessness. The metal clamped tightly, almost crushing any last shred of hope that he could escape this nightmare. "Follow me." Another officer spoke, his tone void of any compassion. They began dragging him toward the security area, but with each step, Ethan's feet felt heavier, as though each stride was a weight dragging him down further into despair. The faces around him remained silent, offering no protest, no help, not even a single voice to speak up. The glares of contempt continued to rain down on him, as though he were the criminal that no one wanted to associate with. It was as if he had already been judged, sentenced without a chance for defense. And in that moment, amidst the suffocating silence, Ethan felt the deepest sense of loneliness he had ever known. He was no longer the successful businessman, no longer someone to be respected. He was nothing more than a man stripped of dignity, the world around him turning its back with each passing second. As he walked, the glares felt like knives piercing his back. Every step seemed heavier than the last, the handcuffs growing tighter. But the pain wasn't physical. It was emotional, a profound wound in his soul. He couldn't understand why he had to endure this. Why was he being forced to face this horror? In the absolute silence of the airport, the insult became something deeply ingrained in his mind, an unshakable part of his reality. The oppression began swallowing the last remnants of hope that Ethan had, leaving him with only one question: why? Sarah Chun, Ethan's assistant, sat before her computer screen, the blue glow reflecting off her face. Her expression was a mixture of determination and resolve. She knew that what she was about to do was not just about restoring Ethan's reputation. It was about uncovering the full truth behind everything that had transpired. Sarah was no stranger to adversity. She had proven her talent and intelligence in countless high-pressure situations. But this time, it wasn't just about her skill, it was about justice. The computer screen flickered briefly before transitioning to a dark interface, lines of code scrolling rapidly across the screen. Sarah's fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, each keystroke resonating with a sense of urgency. She was aware that the airline security system was one of the most sophisticated in the world, but nothing could stop Sarah when she set her mind to a goal. Within minutes, she had breached the final layer of security. "Here it is," Sarah whispered, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She accessed the flight's video footage, meticulously searching for a clip that could serve as irrefutable evidence of the slander Ethan had endured. Her fingers slid across the touchpad, pausing as she found the crucial video, security camera footage from the airplane. In just a few short seconds, this video would expose everything. Sarah clicked on the video and began playing it slowly. The images were crystal clear. Avery, the flight attendant, strutted down the airplane aisle with a self-satisfied look on her face. She then discreetly handed a small bag to a waiting police officer near the airplane's door. The video continued, capturing their brief exchange. Avery leaned in, speaking quietly to the officer, unaware that the camera was recording everything. The two shared a look of mutual understanding before the officer walked away, and Avery returned to the first-class cabin where the altercation had taken place. Sarah stopped the video, letting out a deep sigh. She hadn't expected it to be this easy. Avery's actions had been documented in full detail, irrefutable, and clear. Sarah knew this was the moment to expose the truth. Without wasting a second, she hit the send button, forwarding the video to the media and to trusted contacts she had built relationships with in the press. Within an hour, the video had gone viral. Major news outlets and social media platforms couldn't keep up with the explosive information. Shocking discovery: flight attendant caught in racist plot to humiliate black passenger on a flight. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, the views surpassed 1 million. Comments flooded in as outrage poured out from all corners. Public opinion could no longer ignore this truth. Those who had supported Avery before were now forced to confront her cruel actions. "They can't hide the truth anymore," Sarah whispered, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "This is Ethan's moment to reclaim power." The video quickly became the talk of the town on social media and in the media outlets. A new battle had begun. All eyes were now on Avery, on the ruthlessness of her actions. Ethan now was no longer just a victim of discrimination. He was standing up for justice, defending what was right. With every passing second, the number of views and comments continued to rise. The truth had been laid bare, and no one could look away. Phones, computers, and televisions all flashed the haunting footage, a powerful reminder of the world's inherent injustice, one where racism could be exposed in an instant. As for Avery, could she redeem herself? Would the weight of her actions and the media storm she had unleashed be something she could ever recover from? The world was watching, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The media storm didn't stop with the viral video. It grew into a full-blown movement. Justice for Ethan spread like a giant wave across social media platforms. The hashtags exploded on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. People were no longer just discussing the racial discrimination in the airline industry. They were standing up against a systemic issue that existed not just within one airline, but also in law enforcement agencies. The allegations against Avery and the humiliation of the black passenger caused a worldwide uproar, reaching far beyond the United States. Major newspapers began reporting the story at a frantic pace. Summit Air found itself at the center of a severe public relations crisis. Endless interviews were being conducted, and the truth about Avery's actions was being uncovered piece by piece. Meanwhile, the police department where the discriminatory officer worked came under scrutiny. A federal investigation was launched to uncover the shady ties between Avery and the officers involved in the incident. Immediately, the pressure on the airline mounted. Summit Air was forced to announce an internal investigation and temporarily suspend Avery. However, the public wasn't satisfied with vague statements from the airline. They demanded real action, and all eyes turned to Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan, after spending hours in the holding cell, was finally released. But what awaited him wasn't peace. It was a world consumed by the chaos of public opinion. The looks from those around him, especially business partners, were no longer the same. He had survived the ordeal, but a new challenge now awaited him. Ethan glanced at his wristwatch. Only a few hours left before the critical deadline for the multi-million-dollar business deal he was holding on to. Time was slipping away, and the weight of knowing that investors, partners, and key business figures could change their minds at any moment hung over him. Everything now depended on whether he could maintain his image in their eyes after everything that had happened. "Stay strong," Ethan whispered to himself, his gaze drifting to the phone Sarah had just sent him. The constant notifications from the media and calls for justice from the public continued to flood in. One part of him wanted to explode in fury. Another part knew this was the moment to prove that he was not just the victim, but the victor in this fight. The multi-million-dollar contract had now become more than just a symbol of business success. It was a symbol of vengeance, a bold statement that he would never be subdued, that no one would ever again think he was unworthy. The stage lights shone down on Ethan Cole's weary face, but he stood tall, unbowed. Despite the physical pain still lingering from the ordeal and the mental turmoil he had endured, nothing could prevent him from walking into this crucial press conference. In his simple suit, hair unkempt from sleepless nights, he maintained the poise of a man who had weathered the storm. All eyes in the room were on him, the reporters ready with their prepared questions. But this time, Ethan knew that no one could shake him. He stepped up to the podium, holding a stack of documents, his gaze sweeping over the curious faces below. The room fell into complete silence, as if time itself had come to a halt. "Today, I will not talk about my million-dollar contract." Ethan's voice rang out, firm and unwavering. "Today, I will speak about the truth, about the ones who humiliated me and countless others, those who used their power to strip away our dignity." He began playing the video Sarah had extracted, and the room was immediately struck with the shocking footage of Avery handing a bag to the officer, clandestinely engaging in criminal activity. The room fell into a stunned silence, the reporters' eyes widening, their indifference replaced with astonishment and empathy. "This is the truth," Ethan continued, his eyes sweeping over the room, ensuring that no one could avoid his gaze. "This is the proof of how they use their power to ruin my life and turn an innocent man into a criminal simply because of his skin color." His voice cut through the air, sharp and determined. But he didn't stop there. Every name in the chain of wrongdoing was meticulously laid out, each detail clear, and each person involved singled out. The entire corrupt system at Summit Air, from the flight attendants to the police officers involved in this conspiracy, was exposed. Ethan wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for all those who had been overlooked, belittled, or discarded due to racism, for all those pushed into a corner in a world filled with injustice. He was no longer just a victim in this story. He had become a symbol of resurrection from the ashes, a man who stood tall against every pressure to defend his dignity and justice. Each of Ethan's words was not only powerful, but profound. He reminded everyone of respect, human rights, and justice, emphasizing that racism should never be allowed to hinder one's path to success or equality. He challenged everyone in the room, especially the senior officials from Summit Air and law enforcement, that the truth would no longer be hidden. The room was engulfed in silence. Every reporter scribbled down every word, every sentence. No questions were asked anymore, because everyone knew the answers had already been given. This wasn't just a press conference. It was a resounding declaration of restored dignity, a statement that one could rise even after being humiliated, and that the forces of evil could not win in this fight. Ethan wasn't just the winner of his battle with Avery or the airline. He was the victor in the battle against the very system of injustice that had imprisoned and categorized people by their skin color and power. The following day, Ethan Cole didn't just walk out of the boardroom with a $10 million contract in his hand. He walked out with an undeniable strength. After all the trials, after every storm he had weathered, he had earned what he truly deserved. The contract wasn't just a signed document. It was proof of his resilience, of the truth that could not be hidden. But it didn't stop there. In a surprising move, Ethan was appointed as the new co-CEO of Summit Air, the same airline where he had been humiliated on a private flight. This time, it wasn't anyone else but him at the helm, steering the company away from the storm of racism and injustice. It was a decision that left the world astonished, asking themselves who could stand so tall after being so humiliated. But Ethan wasn't there just to hold a position of power. He was there to change everything. In an official announcement broadcast across all media platforms, he declared that Summit Air would undergo a comprehensive overhaul, not just organizationally, but philosophically. No one will ever again be judged by their appearance. They will be judged by their ability and their character. This statement from Ethan was not just an empty slogan. It was a powerful commitment to all the airline's employees, to all its customers, and to the society he had once had to fight against. Ethan's declaration was a direct challenge to anyone who had ever thought that skin color, appearance, or background could determine a person's worth. He wasn't just piloting the company's aircraft. He was shaping the future of an industry weighed down by deeply ingrained prejudice. He would never allow anyone, any group, to suffer discrimination and disrespect simply because they didn't fit into society's outdated standards of acceptable. Ethan was building a new airline, a place where everyone, from employees to passengers, felt valued. To many, this change seemed unbelievable, but in Ethan's heart, it was an obvious truth. Deserving isn't something others can give you. It's something you earn through your own effort, determination, and dignity. Summit Air was no longer just a business. It had become a symbol of change, a living testament that anything can change when one is determined to break down all barriers. And in this moment, Ethan knew that he hadn't just regained respect. He had helped the world redefine what it truly means to be deserving. Sometimes you are torn apart, trampled on, humiliated, only to one day use those very wounds to reshape an entire system. Never stay silent when treated unjustly, because you deserve to be seen for your true worth. Ethan's journey is not just the story of a man who rose after shocks, but a reminder for all of us. Sometimes the scars life leaves behind are the driving force that pushes us to change the world, to become the ones who make a difference. Those who once thought you weren't worthy, who judge you through the lens of prejudice and ignorance, will eventually realize one truth. No one has the right to define your worth except for you. Remember, you deserve to be seen for who you truly are, not by your appearance, not by your background or society's blind biases. It is your resilience, determination, and dignity that truly determine your value. So never stay silent when you're treated unjustly. Stand up, because you have the right to determine your own fate. As long as you don't give up, don't accept injustice, you can change the world around you. Live and fight with the true value of yourself, because you deserve to be recognized not just for what you achieve, but for how you face and overcome the challenges in your life. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. Your support means the world, and together, we can continue to share stories that inspire, uplift, and challenge the status quo. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with others who might need a reminder of their own strength and worth. By subscribing, you'll be the first to hear new stories that tackle the real issues we face every day. Let's spread the message of justice, equality, and the power of standing up for what's right. Remember, you are not alone. Together, we can change the world, one story at a time. Subscribe now, and let's make this journey even more powerful.